You had a plan and you are working towards your perfect 5 march, and every time you feel like you're getting close to it, all of a sudden new commanders comes in and then it's all over the place again. Do you go for the new commanders or do you kind of stick to your plan? What if you're halfway done? What if you have some other maxed commanders that you're using currently? Do you bench them? Do you go with the new ones? It gets pretty confusing. Now with the new commanders, Scipio and Flavius, we kind of know who they pair with, right? With Scipio, obviously the ideal pair is Guan, no doubt about that. And when it comes to Flavius, you pair with Zenobia for Garrison, no doubt about that either. But then there's still all these questions, like what if you don't have Zenobia? Do you still go for Flavius? Is Flavius any good for open field? What if you had Leo already 5511 or even maxed, or a maxed Alex from early KVKs? What do you do? You don't have Pakal, but then you have Harold. Does Harold kind of go with any one of them? So this is what we kind of wanted to talk about in this video. So let's go through the usual, drop the like and the subscribe, and then we'll get started with all those conversations. Whilst you're going through liking and subscribing, also a reminder to join our Discord, linked in description, so you will have all commander talent trees, equipment guides and all sorts of things there, so don't forget that. Thank you for the like and hopefully a subscribe as well. Now, why are we looking at CJ? Well, the reason why we are looking at CJ is just to show you guys that not every single commander that comes out is OP. CJ was kind of a disappointment and he's not a good commander overall. Most people didn't invest in him, but that doesn't look like it's gonna be the case with the two new commanders. I mean, CJ from early on, you could kind of tell that he's not really good at anything. But then now when we look at the newer commanders, both of them on paper at least kind of looks pretty OP. Now let's talk about Scipio. So why is everyone saying Scipio is the perfect match for Guan? It's to do with his expertise skill, but let's just read through his skills and see how does he look in general if there was no Guan in the game. So skill has enemy health reduction, that's the highlight, 30%, and you get up to 2000 damage factor, and it can hit 3 targets as well, so that's very good. And then there are some skills where you just add more attributes to infantry, and then there's some additional damage factor, and there's health as well, infantry health, that's very good, 20%. So there's quite a few things. Now the one of the things that I would like to mention about Scipio is not necessarily he has to be paired with Guan, but then there's a synergy, that's why people say Guan. But there's nothing there that kind of rules out from pairing Scipio with any other commander. He got a very good utility, he got a support skill as well, so you can kind of use him as a primary as well, but it's the, I guess, the last skill or the expertise, that's why people say it has to be a Guan. And it just makes sense because you get 30% faster rage and when the enemy is silenced, and Guan's gonna do the silence and you're gonna do the rage. That just, you know, match made in heaven. But then the other skills he has, all of them are actually good for open field, and it doesn't rule him out for pairing with anyone else. Now if he is perfect with Guan, why would you? Well, you shouldn't. But then we keep getting questions about what do I do with my Leo? Leo is 5511. Now do I keep pairing Leo? I want to pair Leo with Guan, so what do I do with my Scipio? Well, again, the ideal answer is drop the Leo. Leo used to be a very good commander for all the 300 Sparta fans and whatever. Leo is not a good commander anymore. Like, if you have to, whilst you're working on your Scipio, you can, but then it's not a good idea. But then I think we still need to have that conversation where is there any use for Leo? Now Leo was made to pair with Guan, so unlike Scipio, it's not like he pairs well with anyone else, unlike Alex as well. So Alex can pair well with anyone. So the problem with, I guess, Leo is Leo doesn't do any damage until he's fully dead, so that's why Leo is not a good commander in general. Whereas Alex's last skill or expertise is extremely good for open field fighting, where you make the enemy take 30% increased damage for a while. So with the Alex, you can pair the Alex with pretty much anyone. Alex and, say for example, Harold makes a very good pair. Even if you didn't have the Pakal, I mean Pakal, again, just like Guan and Scipio is gonna be, Pakal and Harold is already match made in heaven. But then you can use an Alex and Harold. but the Leo kind of doesn't go with anyone else. So if you haven't invested in Leo already, definitely don't. If you're coming from early KVK, just skip Leo altogether. Forget about Sparta. Sparta didn't conquer anything in their lives, but then the Romans did. That's why you need to go for the Roman commanders. Now, speaking of the Romans, the latest edition, Flavius. Now, Flavius, if you read through his skills, you'll see that the first skill is kind of good for open field. It doesn't specify you have to be in a garrison, but most of the other skills has half of it where you get on open field, the other half you kind of don't get unless you're in garrison, saying that his fourth skill has no garrison component on it either. And then if you look at the fourth skill, he has a little bit of a chance to silence the enemy, and that's what we were looking on Scipio, right? Now, how does he silence? He can only silence if the target is taking additional damage, and on his first skill he does have a chance of doing additional damage. Now, Scipio doesn't really do any additional damage, but then again Scipio can benefit from that silence even though it's a lower chance than the Guan, right? So in a way, if you're trying to take like 4 marches of infantry or 5 marches of infantry, you can really pair Scipio and Flavius together. Now in that case, Scipio will be primary. It's not going to be the best march, but Scipio will be primary because Scipio has the health debuff, and then Flavius will be the secondary. But then you don't go for Flavius based on that. You will only go for Flavius if you have the Zenobia maxed, and the primary purpose will be to garrison with infantry, and then the secondary use is, you know, open field behind the Scipio if you really wanted. But then in that case you have to have Leo or Alex, because then the Guan can pair with them and you can kind of take out your Leo because you really wanted to, or the Alex because you have him max, right? Now, just confirming again, I'm not trying to say that Flavius is good for open field at all. I'm saying if you have a Zenobia maxed and then you get the Flavius because of that, then you can use the Flavius in open field if you wanted to. Now, one other commander where you can, I mean, this is where I'm going into whale territory, I guess, because other than whales, no one really has Chiok or CJ Max. Now, if you did have CJ Max, Flavius kind of goes well as a secondary to your CJ. I mean, Scipio does as well. Scipio pairs with everyone, but then Flavius you can kind of use with the CJ because CJ does have a little bit of a chance to do additional damage, and that's where there's a little bit of a synergy if you're really stretching. And then there's all sorts of other good infantry kind of skills, but then as I say, CJ is not really a good commander at all, and Flavius is not necessarily good for open field. But if you're taking up say 5-6 infantry marches again, and if you're full on infantry with a 10% infantry health skin, then that's an option you can kind of consider. Now, what about Pakal and Herald? Like, is there a situation where you break up and Pakal and Herald for those commanders? No, definitely no, because Herald has this thing where he reduces his own defense and Pakal has a chance of actually managing that a little bit better. And both of them are really high on counter-attack damage, so too much synergy to consider breaking them up. The only situation where you kind of break them up is if you don't have Pakal, but then if you have Pakal, definitely Pakal. Alex and Herald is good, but that's if you don't have Pakal. Now, Herald, if you don't have the Pakal, you may have been using with your Charles, and this is now a good time where you can maybe take Alex and Herald out, and then you can take Guan and Scipio out. That way you got 2 extremely good infantry marches, and all 4 commanders came for Will, and you didn't need to worry about the disappointing event for most people MGE at all. So everything based on wills, and that's more free to play friendly because spinning costs less than winning MGE in general speaking, unless you're in a completely dead KD. Now, Flavius MGE, so that's where, I mean, it's kind of a whale commander because garrison leaders usually have to spend on crystal tech and equipment and all that. So we're not gonna worry too much about Flavius, but then when it comes to the Scipio, obviously extremely highly recommended you go for Scipio, because it's the next best thing after Guan when it comes to infantry. Now let's talk about your marches. How would they look like? If you're taking out one march, then ideal pair is still going to be Guan and Scipio. For your second infantry march, ideal pair is Pakal and Harold, where you can replace the Pakal with an Alex if you really wanted to. But then if you're trying to take a third march of infantry, then it kind of gets a little bit messy. So in that case, you can go with Guan Leo, because otherwise Leo is going to become kind of useless. And then you can still kind of stick to the Pakal and Harold, and then the spare commanders you have is probably Alex and Scipio, and that's where you kind of have to go with Alex and Scipio. And the question of a fourth march kind of comes in if you have CJ and Flavius, and in that case you can take out CJ primary and Flavius secondary. So that's where the 4 march kind of sticks in, but then most people will probably do the 2, and we kind of did cover the 2 march, 3 march, and 4 march as well if you really wanted to. So to summarize what we kind of talked about, unless you have Zenobia, don't go for Flavius. If you have a max Zenobia, then for garrison purposes you can invest in Flavius, and then you can kind of consider using him in field fights as well if you really need to. If you haven't invested in Leo already, please don't. He's not a good commander. Then CJ is definitely not a good commander. And then Scipio, definitely do invest in Scipio because he's kind of OP. Now, when you're new in Season of Conquest or just about to come into Season of Conquest, Scipio and Guan are gonna be your primary commanders. If you have an Alex from before, then obviously you can use the Alex. Alex is still pretty good, much better than the Leo. Now, when it comes to early game, still confidently invest in Alex because you can still use Alex. Now, next week, the Scipio is gonna come in, so I'm planning to do max spins, so we'll obviously be streaming that. Now in your case, if you have a lot of gems, yes, then definitely max win. If you don't have enough gems, then at least do the 10 or how much ever you can do. So basically saying definitely go for Scipio. On paper, he looks just as OP as Nevsky is, maybe not as OP, but not too far away. So hope this video was useful, and I will see you in the next one. Don't forget to like and subscribe.